Good morning. Thank you all for joining us. Today we're doing a session on our journal articles. So welcome to Research Highlights, where we'll be sharing a 3-minute articles from the research journal from Alt. So joining me this morning is Michael Flavin, Tunde, Varga-Atkins and Richard Walker. So I'm going to pass over to them for the presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you're enjoying conference thus far. In this presentation, we have an opportunity to focus on the research journal that's published by the Association for Learning Technology. And that journal is Research in Learning Technology. My name is Michael and I'm the editor-in-chief of the journal. And with me is Tunde, who is on the editorial board of the journal. And although my name features at the top of the slide, it really should be Tunde's because she's done the vast bulk of the work for this presentation. What we're going to do within this presentation is look at 3 papers that have been published recently. We're very privileged to have one of the authors with us as part of the presentation, and the other 2 have offered us video files which will play, technology allowing, within the body of this presentation. One, they'll give you the sense of what the journal is like and what it's publishing. And we hope that some of you who are in attendance are yourselves thinking about how you can become more active members of the learning technology community by undertaking and publishing your own research. And we'll see what we can do in this presentation and beyond to facilitate those ambitions, because I think it's really important that we get that sense of community going. As we move through the presentation, essentially we'll be handing back and forth between myself and Tunde. So we'd very sincerely like you to think of us as academic chuckle brothers for the next half hour or so. If we can move on to the next slide, please. To me. So I think one of the things to think about is where we are, where our own research journey is, where we're going to. I think I'll let Tunde talk to this particular slide before I come back to give some background info on the journal itself.
Yes, so I think that this is very much the spirit of this session, is what we wanted to achieve. So that just to, many of us will read papers and will engage with written text, but really research is about having discussions with people. And by inviting authors, we wanted to develop these conversations. So we have an experience of actually talking to some of the authors and really encouraging you to, through your research plans, if you have any, to do the same. So that's what the spirit of this session. And on the chat, we would love to hear from you. So if we using these visual metaphors to describe your research journey at the moment, where would you be? Would it be in the right-hand side in a safe harbor when you've navigated through the difficulties and know how to do the process, how to anchor your boats? Or is it perhaps that you've already, bought or designed your boat, but overcoming difficulties and in your publication journey? So we would love to just hear, quoting perhaps some of these metaphors as where you're up to in your research journey. And while you're doing that in the chat, I will hand back over to Michael to talk a bit about the journal.
Thank you. A bit of background information about the journal and some salient points to stress. One is that Research in Learning Technology is an open access journal. Increasingly, academic journals are only available to you if your university or other employer subscribes to that journal's contents, and this inevitably limits dissemination. But if your work appears in Research in Learning Technology, it's completely open access. Another feature of open access journals is that authors are asked to make a financial contribution towards that open access status. But that doesn't apply with us. This is a journal in which it's free to publish. So if you meet the quality standards, more of which later, then there's nothing further that's required of you, and you have an article published in a reputable journal with potentially very wide dissemination. If we can move to the next slide, please. Just to evidence the credibility of the journal, we're listed in numerous databases, and moreover, we have a rising impact factor. Impact factors, possibly the single most important metric in academic journals, whereby it indicates how articles published in Research and Learning Technology then go on to be cited by other researchers. So if you publish with us, you get widespread dissemination, you get credibility of a reputable academic journal, and every possibility that your work then can enter a wider scholarly debate that pushes the discipline forward. If we could move to the next slide, please. So here's what we're doing, we think, in RLT, and with the current editorial board, we're here to open a gated community. Quite often in academia, research is a slightly demarcated and often privileged space. And you meet expert practitioners who somehow think, well, that space for doing my own research and seeing that work published, that's not really for me. I think we don't accept that precept. We challenge it. And I think all members of the Research and Learning Technology community can make a contribution to the advancement and the development of learning technology. We all started out, we were all beginners, and yes, there's a learning curve, but I think in Research and Learning Technology, we're here to facilitate that learning curve, and in a presentation like this, just show what you can do and show some of the excellent work that's come out of our journal recently. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. Tunde and I have selected 3 papers for you. They relate well to the conference theme. We talk about care and collaboration in these spaces. I think they're also interesting because they highlight different methodologies, different ways of going about your research. And I think they're also interesting because of their diversity. They look at different educational sectors and they come from different countries because we are an international journal. So hopefully this subsection within the presentation will give you a sense of the journal, will excite you as to its contents, and may give you ideas too as to how your practice and your research can feed into these wider discussions. So we're very lucky to have with us Richard Walker, who's the first author on the first paper we're looking at within this presentation, facilitating peer-led group research through virtual collaboration spaces, an exploratory research study. Over to you, Richard.
Thanks very much for the introduction, Michael, and for the opportunity to share practice here. So yes, this was a collaboration. My role is providing the e-learning and sort of educational design insights, but worked very closely with Satari Chong and James Chong in our Department of Biology, who are the subject matter experts, and we worked collaboratively over a couple of years actually on before we submitted for publication. If we move on to the next slide. Our interest was in how we could replicate the dynamics that take place in our labs between our final year undergraduate project students at the University of York and their facilitators, graduate students who are there to provide just-in-time support. How can we match that peer-led learning to support research projects remotely? And we did this pre-pandemic, looking at how we could move to a blended model where the majority of students' research work actually could take place remotely with the campus-based time with instructors sort of focus more on sort of summary of results. So the role of near peers, graduate facilitators, was really important in this in terms of our research design. And from a technology perspective, we look to make use of a team-based environment, Slack, in order to facilitate this. And this is what the paper's about. Can we, in terms of the first research question, sort of replicate the near-peer dynamics online, and how successful is Slack as a platform in supporting that? And Slack has certain affordances in terms of communication tools, as well as search tools and prompt alerts as well, which we're very interested in seeing how they would work in complementing problem solving and troubleshooting activities that our students would be engaging in. Okay, if we go on to the next slide. So what we did is a multi-year study, almost a sort of an action research one, where we ran a pilot study with our initial cohort 2017-2018, and drawing lessons from that in terms of how to get better interaction between groups of students and their near peers. We made some adjustments and then ran it again 2018-2019. Okay, if we move on to the next slide. So you will have noticed that the cohort's very small, sort of under 10 for each year. But what we did do is go for a mixed methods approach, a rich picture of what those students were doing. And we did that through surveys, entry, exit surveys, and activity logs. We got students to reflect at various milestones about their learning experience, what they were doing and how impactful that was. And then we ran a focus group at the end in order to get a sort of a really detailed sort of insights from them in their own words in terms of their learning experience, how they'd navigated the online Slack experience. And then we used the all the entries that they made within the Slack environment, and obviously with ethical permission for that, we ran a content analysis looking at the different levels of interactions in order to determine the type of learning that was taking place. Okay, on to the next slide. And our findings, certainly based on what we saw with the adjusted design for the 2018-29 cohort, showed that we moved successfully students away from instructor-led learning, giving them a greater sense of ownership of that online learning, and Slack was complementary in that respect in terms of through its alerts supporting agile problem solving, but also it helped the less confident project students to achieve positive outcomes, and that was through the search facilities, the ability to engage in observational learning. So we believe that there's plenty of scope for this as a team-based tool to support peer-led learning moving forward. But there are lessons learned, and these are shared in the paper, particularly the need to socialize our students to learning methods, provide clear communication about instructional roles, but also to provide training to our near peers, and the focus on responsiveness is absolutely key to this learning approach. So that's it in a nutshell. Hopefully I've covered it in my 3 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And I think, I mean, we have put in some thought questions or prompts for for you listening. So if anything that resonates with your practice or anything that you might want to ask Richard about the research process of the other 2 papers coming up, please put that in the comment box. But just while we're waiting, if people did want to ask some questions or even observations and comments about, is it resonating with your own practice, that I really like, Richard, in your research, that you had a really strong underpinning. You mentioned peer learning, and you really based your research design. So not necessarily, I mean, obviously it's very interesting in terms of what you're looking at, the content and the outcomes of the research. But if I also zoom in on the process and how you've conducted it, I think that's a really strong aspect of it, that you, as you say, you brought in the literature around peer learning, peer-led learning, and also the framework that you used around cognitive thinking to analyze the interactions. Again, that I think really useful and a strong underpinning of the research design. Is there anything perhaps that you wanted to pick out for people listening or thinking about publishing research that might be useful from your process?
I think it's important to think about the contribution that you're making, and for us, the peer-led learning, that there is an established sort of body of literature on that, but very little indeed on actually sort of moving that to an online delivery side of things. So I think that's something to think about. Where's the niche? Where's the actual sort of contribution that you're making to the sort of the body of knowledge? How are you taking things forward?
And just because we're talking about open access and obviously sustainable and reusable learning resources, it's the same with research design as well. So you have used a framework to analyze responses. I'm guessing anyone who did a similar activity, and you mentioned using Teams now. Obviously, a lot of people have come on to use Teams now, so they could run a similar study as using those frameworks. So I think that's also a nice thing, that people don't need to necessarily reinvent everything. You can use what's already there.
Absolutely. The content analysis framework is one I've used for problem-based learning research in the past. It's a very, very good one, the Fox and McKeown one. And as you say, it captures that sort of range of different sort of levels of cognitive interaction. So it's brilliant in terms of giving that rich picture of how students are contributing in online fora.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, I could go on asking and discussing this one paper. I know we were a bit ambitious to try and cover 3. So what we will do is, Richard, you're very welcome to you also respond or pick things up online. And we do encourage you to make contacts, because I think it's always nice, as this is what we are trying to achieve here, is to get these conversations going. So I think you also have Michael now as a connection point. So, but in the interest, so thank you, Richard, very much for your paper, and do encourage people to go and have a read it. And we will move on to the next paper, which is Michael, do you want to introduce this, and we will then play it?
Yeah, I will. I'd also like just to chuck in a postscript to the paper of Richard and his colleagues, with one eye on the fact that attendees may be thinking themselves about undertaking research for publication, either with us or with another journal in the field. One thing as a reader I really appreciated about the paper by Richard and his colleagues was its use of mixed method. It's one I'm using at the moment. And just to think about how you can do your own research. If you start with a survey or similar instrument, it gives you that ground level data, probably tell things you don't know about points of emphasis in the data that come through, from which you can then develop a qualitative instrument which allows you to elaborate on your early findings and go into greater depth on them. So I think as a methodology, it's a really interesting way of producing valid and reliable data and interesting papers, as Richard showed. So for this paper, what we'll do first, we have a video contribution from 2 of the 3 authors. So if we have a look at that first, I'll provide a brief bit of commentary, and of course anyone's welcome then to put comments in. Thank you, Tunde. We haven't got volume, Tunde.
Relationships and the perception of care.
Sorry.
And we're here to present.
Is it okay now?
Entitled
Right.
Improving Student and Faculty Communication: The Impact of Texting and Electronic Feedback on Building Relationships and the Perception of Care, published in Research and Learning Technology.
As avid users of technology, we wanted to determine if this improved communication or impacted student-faculty relationships, which led to 2 research questions. First, what actions by faculty constitute caring, and what role does technology play in students feeling cared for?
We used Nodding's Ethics of Care as our theoretical framework, and for our literature review, we focused on why care matters in higher education and technology and relationships.
Our participants were 8 faculty from varied disciplines, teaching 15 courses at a small liberal arts college in the Mid-Atlantic in the US. It included 307 undergraduate students. This was a mixed methodology study that incorporated the Education School Climate Survey and personal interviews.
After reviewing the research, we found several emerging themes for our first research question: what actions by faculty constitute caring? Availability, helpfulness, approachability, personality and reputation, effort to know the student, and reaching out.
The emergent themes for our second question, what role does technology play in students feeling cared for, included convenience, accessibility, connectedness, and response time.
We want to mention several key findings. First, technology has a positive impact. Second, students identified a variety of different indicators of care, and the mode of feedback had limited impact.
This study led to a rich discussion, including challenging several of our assumptions. For example, we thought female faculty and humanities faculty would be seen as more caring. However, there was no data to back these initial assumptions. When asked about their feedback preferences, students reported 57% preferred technology, 23% preferred face-to-face or written feedback, and 20% preferred a combination or had no preference. In addition, the longer or more times a student interacted with a faculty member, regardless of the circumstances, the more likely they were to say they felt cared for by them.
We also noted that although millennials are frequently seen as digital natives, several students in our study mentioned not being technology savvy. Some students also made the presumption that younger faculty were more technology savvy. However, there was no data to back these claims. In courses, students often felt technology was used for their benefit instead of faculty members.
Our findings demonstrate that implementing technology can help build caring relationships. Furthermore, they indicate that faculty who take the extra time to exhibit care for students have a positive impact.
We invite you to take a moment to pause this video, scan our QR code to read our article. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If we can move on to the next slide, please.
Yep.
Thank
Okay,
you,
so
Tunde.
I'm aware that we are running out of time, Michael, so I might need to be brief. Yes.
Okay, well, the questions there we can take into offline conversations. I suppose what interested me there as a reader was what students rated highly in care was the actual fact of availability rather than a more explicitly pastoral quality, and the way that technology was seen as a means to support and enhance availability. So it had avoided thinking of technology as panacea and looked at it as a means of supporting and enhancing practice. I'm mindful of time delays, so I suppose we'll move on to the third video so we can ensure we incorporate that.
Hello everyone, hypothesis 1 was partly supported.
Apologies.
I will be presenting this study, which is about student engagement and disengagement in technology-enhanced learning, and more precisely has a focus on gamers, gender and non-native students. My name is Nina Bergdahl, and I'm a researcher at the Department of Education in Malmö, Sweden, and I'm affiliated with the Department of Computer and System Sciences at Stockholm University. So we distributed a questionnaire to 410 students across 11 upper and secondary schools in Sweden to survey how they perceive their engagement and disengagement when learning with digital technologies. We raised several questions, but in this particular study, we raised 3 hypotheses: that academic engagement and disengagement would differ between high and low frequency gaming students, or what we can refer to here as gamers and non-gamers. We found that most variables were similar for high and low frequency gaming students, but that certain variables, specifically in the cognitive dimension, showed significant differences. That meant that the hypothesis 1 was partly supported. Hypothesis 2 was fully supported. It surveyed the differences between female and male students and found significant differences across all engagement dimensions of both engagement and disengagement. Finally, we looked at the difference between native and non-native speakers. We found that non-native and native speaking students engage similarly, but we had also seen that some students engage in non-authorized activities with their digital devices, and that non-native students in the cohort that we explored were significantly underrepresented when we talk about disengagement. Conclusively, while gamers did not view their digital devices as resources that support learning, they also were less sensitive to notifications and information overflow. Female students displayed significantly higher levels of pro-learning engagement variables than male students, but male students, on the other hand, were more satisfied with teacher social presence online. And then we found that non-native speakers refrained from unauthorized users to a higher extent than native speakers. So gaining a nuanced understanding of student engagement and disengagement for particular subgroups is important when we want to design learning activities to redeem disengagement and increase engagement. If you have further queries, don't hesitate to get in touch.
Yeah, so I think that was a really interesting paper from the school sector, but these are the students that will be coming to university. So I think that would be really relevant and very topical discussion given the current global context around the worries for student gaming, for instance. That was some really interesting conclusions and observation in this paper. I'm just aware that we are running out of time, and we wanted to close with some tips from on getting published. Michael, do you want to?
Yeah, I would say, look, we were assuming that some of the attendees here this morning are interested in writing for us or writing for academic journals more generally. So we would say, look, read some of our articles, read the 3 articles in this presentation, read our author guidelines. We revised those earlier this year, so they're up to date. Make sure your work adheres to them. We have word limits, we have paper structures. when you submit, your work first comes to a member of the editorial board, Tunde or myself or one of the other members, and we make a decision about whether it goes out to peer review. And I'm afraid if you haven't adhered to our guidelines, that's very, very unlikely. So please do take time to study the journal, write for us specifically, adhere to the guidelines, and if we do send your work out and it gets peer reviewed, you'll get constructive criticism back. Stress constructive rather than criticism. It's there to be worked with, to enhance your work so you can bring it to publication. You have the immense satisfaction of that, and then you enter part of that wider scholarly and research community, and we'd love to facilitate you on that journey. To you, Tunde.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you wanted to comment anything in the chat of where you're up to, but really just wanted to close with the picture that, you know, we are very welcoming in this bay and harbor, and would love to engage with more research and for you to engage and contact others. I think it's lovely to get connected with researchers who are like-minded and do the same thing. Thank you so much for coming, and it's a goodbye from us.
Thank you everyone for joining us. That was a really interesting session. It'd be great to carry on the discussion on Discord. I've shared the link to the free papers in the resources chat, so feel free to carry on the conversation there. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Christina. Bye, everyone.